Wake up.
Entry 13. Gold. And Amira, the banker. 6 days ago.
With El Mujahid and his soldiers gone, that left only 6 people in the camp besides Galt. 4 guards, a servant, and Amira, who was both the wife of El Mujahid and the head of Galt's covert research division here in the Middle East. She was a gorgeous woman, and a freakishly brilliant scientist whose insight into disease pathogens bordered on the mystical. While he waited for her, he switched on his PDA and accessed the files the American had sent, most of which were official reports on the task force raid. Most of it had gone exactly as arranged, although the American didn't know that. There were a lot of things that Galt chose not to share with the nervous Yank. He did wonder, however, why the crab processing plant had not yet been raided. He made a note to ask Toys to look into that. The tent flaps opened. He turned to see her standing there, and for a moment all thoughts of raids and schemes evaporated from his head. Amira was slim, average height, dressed in a black chadiri that showed only her eyes, and she might have gone unnoticed in a bazaar or on a crowded street, unless, of course, any sane man made eye contact with her. Then the anonymity would disintegrate like sand sculpture in the face of a zephyr. This woman could stop traffic with her eyes. Galt had seen her do it. Conversations always faltered when she entered a room. Men actually walked into walls. It was the strangest of reactions because it was so contrary to Muslim tradition. To catch a woman's eye once is okay. To do it twice was haram. A social and religious gaffe of serious consequence, especially in the traditional circles in which this woman and El Mujahid traveled. And yet no one, not one man Galt had seen, had ever looked into her eyes and not been affected. It wasn't sex either, because all a man could see of Amira was her eyes, and in the Middle East there were millions of women with beautiful eyes. No, this went deeper than sex. Deeper even than the religious law. This was power. Real, palpable, earth-shaking power. And it was there in Amira's eyes. As if her eyes were a window into the heart of a nuclear furnace. The first time Galt had seen her was 2 months before the Americans invaded Iraq. They were 2 among thousands at an anti-coalition rally in Tikrit. He had been there, quietly recruiting and waiting for his contact that his sources had told him could bring him to El Mujahid. Galt had felt something touch him, almost like hot fingers scraping the skin on the back of his neck. And he'd turned to see this woman standing 15 feet away, just staring at him. He'd been at a loss for words for the first time in his life, totally riveted by the impact of those eyes and of the fierce, vast intelligence behind them. She had walked up to him, affecting the modest gait of a good Muslim woman, and while the crowd was entirely focused on Saddam, who was giving a rousing speech in which he promised to rebuff any U.S. attempt to set foot on Iraqi soil, the woman bent close and said, "I am Amira. I can take you to paradise." In any other circumstances, that line would have been a cheap prostitute's come on. But to Galt, it was the code phrase he'd been waiting to hear for many weeks. He was so taken aback, so startled that this was the messenger he'd come to Tikrit to find, that he almost flubbed the countersign, but after 2 or 3 stammering attempts he managed to say, "And what will I see there?" She had said 3 magical words that filled Galt with great joy. Leaning a few inches closer, Amira had whispered, "Sif Eldin." What will I see there? Sif Eldin, the sword of the faithful. That moment flashed through Galt's mind as Amira stepped into the tent. He got to his feet, smiling, wanting to take her in his arms to tear away that ridiculous black rag she wore. He saw his need mirrored in her eyes as she smiled. All he could see of her smile was the soft crow's feet at the corners of those lustrous brown eyes, and he knew that her smile was as much a promise as it was an acknowledgement. They could do nothing, share nothing, while they were here in El Mujahid's tent. 2 guards stood behind her, both giving him hard stares. "Mr. Galt," she said in a docile voice, "my husband has instructed me to share with you the results of our experiments. Will you please accompany me to the bunker?" "I need to get going. I have to be in Baghdad by—" "Please, Mr. Galt. This is my husband's wish." She put just enough juice on the word wish to make it clear that it meant order. Jolly well done, he thought, as he saw the guards behind her stiffen and harden their stares. It was all drama, nicely staged for effect. Very well, then," Galt said with an effect of bad grace and stood up with a sigh. Amira backed out of the tent, and the 2 guards took position so that one was between her and Galt, and the other was between Galt and any chance of flight. El Mujahid was a careful individual, and that worked well for Galt too. He followed Amira to another tent that was set very close to a rock wall. Inside the tent were ornate well hangings, and a 3rd guard stood with his back to one of these. An AK-47 at port arms, his face as hard as a fist. At a word from Amira, he stepped back and allowed her to push the heavy brocade aside. Behind it was the mouth of a shallow cave. Amira, Galt, and 2 of the guards entered it, walked 10 feet, and then turned with the cave's natural bend. Around the corner, out of sight of the entrance, was a blank wall of rough gray-brown rock hung in desiccated moss. The guards told Galt to turn around and face the mouth of the cave, but Galt knew what was happening behind him. Amira would reach into the moss and pull a slender piece of wire, something that would never be caught in any of the most scrupulous searches of the cave. And there were a lot of caves in Afghanistan. She would pull the wire twice, wait 4 seconds, and then pull it 3 more times. At that point, a piece of the uneven wall would fold down to reveal a computer keypad. Amira would then tap in a code and randomly select a set of numbers and letters that changed daily. And once the code was accepted, she would place her hand on the geography scanner. As far as El Mujahid knew, only 2 people on Earth knew the code, he and his wife. But Galt also knew it. Galt knew everything about the cave, the keypad, and the bunker that lay behind this wall. He had paid for it and had built dozens of computer trapdoors into the system. He also knew how to destroy that bunker and its contents so that not one piece of useful data could be removed. Granted, a large portion of Afghanistan would be sterilized as well, but those, as the Americans were so fond of saying, were the breaks. All he had to do was enter a code in his laptop. And if that didn't work, Galt always had a backup plan ready. And if he disappeared, his assistant, Toys, could initiate one of the several retributive plans. Galt heard the hiss of hydraulics, and the guard grunted at him, indicating that he was allowed to turn. The whole back end of the cave had swung out to reveal an airlock as sophisticated as anything NASA has ever used. "Please," Amira said, gesturing that he enter. One of the two guards remained in the cave while the other stepped into the airlock with Galt and the princess. The massive door hissed shut, and there was a series of complex sounds as various locks and safeguards engaged. A red light flicked on above the door, and they turned to face the exit door as a green light came on above it. Amira went through another code procedure, but this time the guard did not order Galt to look away. Now the guard grinned at Galt, who gave him a wink. "How are the kids, Khalid?" "Very well, sir. Little Muhammad is walking now. He's all over the place." "Ah, they grew up so fast. Give them a kiss for me." "Thank you, Mr. Galt." The second door opened, and a wash of refrigerated air filled the chamber. "Ready?" Amira asked. "Say, Khalid, why don't you go into the office and watch some videos? Give us a couple of hours." "Happy to, sir." They stepped out of the airlock and into the bunker that was as different from the camp outside as a diamond was from a lump of coal. There was a big central room packed with state-of-the-art research equipment and intelligence processing hardware, including satellite downlinks, high-speed internet cable hardlines, plasma display screens on nearly every surface, and a dozen computer terminals. Surrounding the central lab were glassed offices, the super-cooled chamber for the bank of Blue Gene L supercomputers, and the 5 clean rooms with their isolated air and biohazard control systems. Down one corridor was the staff wing, with bedrooms for 80 technicians and the 20 support staff. The setup cost a fortune, 58 million pounds, all routed through convoluted banking threads that would require an army of forensic accountants to follow. Nothing could be tied directly to him or to Gen 2000. It was Galt's belief that this was not only the most sophisticated private research facility in the world, but also the most productive and diverse. Genetics, pharmacology, molecular biology, bacteriology, virology, parasitology, pathology, and over a dozen other related sciences merged into one compact but incredibly productive factory floor that had paid for itself 4 times over with patents filed under the names of over 70 doctors who were on his payroll through one university or another. Not the least of which was the first reliable drug of treating the rare blood cancers, new onset scardiosis, and asbestos-related diseases that have cropped up in the survivors of the World Trade Center collapse. The irony of that made Galt want to laugh out loud, considering he advised bin Laden about the likely and potentially useful post-collapse health hazards before the Al-Qaeda operatives had even enrolled in flight school. Amira had led the way past the rows of technicians, still playing her role as the dutiful wife of the great leader, even though these people were hers, every last one of them. Only Abdul, her husband's lieutenant, and a small squad of his personal guard were currently beyond her control. And they were outside. And even that sense of loyalty would change in time. Everything was going to change. She led Galt into the conference room, then closed the door and engaged the lock. An action that turned on a red security light outside. The room had no windows, just a big table and a lot of chairs. Amira turned away from the door, tore away her shadiri, and attacked Galt. She was fast, savage, hungry. She pushed him back, forcing him down on the table, tearing at his clothes, biting at each bit of exposed flesh. And he grabbed her and clawed her skirts up over her legs. He knew that she would be naked underneath. They had planned this moment, needed it. He was as ready as she was, and he used his heels to slide further onto the table as she climbed over him. She swung a leg across his hips, and then he pulled her toward him. She thrust down onto him. It was hot and hard, painful and sloppy, but it was so intense. Their bodies ground into one another. Love was lost in the avalanche of need, buried beneath the immediacy of their hungers. El Mujahid was sometimes as brutal and intense, but he was always quick. And Amira could endure and outlast any man. Well, almost any man. With Galt, it was different. Instead of a gallop to the precipice and then that quick plunge into unsatisfactory disappointment, they raced on and on, their bodies running with sweat, their hearts hammering like primitive drums, their breath burning into each other's mouths. When they came, they both screamed. The conference room was soundproof. He'd made sure of that.